Recording now. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I am Rasha Abu Sita, the Sustainability Program Coordinator at Emerge Guelph, and I will be your host tonight. I would like to begin with the Aboriginal Land Acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge, as we gather here today, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a community, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work, and a responsibility to foster reconciliation and respect for all Indigenous people who have been stewards and caretakers for this land for generations. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabes people on whose traditional territory we are meeting today. And we encourage folks to continue educating themselves on all current issues facing First Nation communities and peoples across Ontario and Canada, and to learn how to take action to uplift and support Indigenous people from coast to coast to coast. So thank you. Now the next slide is to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event, and I will start reading the list of the co-sponsors as they are. Number one, we've got Citizens Climate Lobby. Number two of the sponsors, Climate Justice Guelph. Our third co-sponsor is Council of Canadians Guelph Chapter. Number four is Emerge Guelph. Number five is Extinction Rebellion Guelph. Number six is Fridays for the Future. And our seventh co-sponsor is Greenhouse Guelph. Our eighth co-sponsor is Green New Deal Guelph. Our nine is Guelph Wellington Coalition for Social Justice. Number 10 of the co-sponsors for tonight is Kairos Guelph. And number 11 is Aubrey Guelph. Number 12 of the co-sponsors is Transition Guelph. And number 13 is Wellington Water Watchers. And the last is Yorklands Green Hub. Thanks to all our co-sponsors for tonight. Without them, we couldn't make this event work. And next is, I will hand the mic to Evan Ferrari, our Executive Director at Emerge Guelph, to give his quick presentation about Emerge and 2050 is too late. Over to you, Evan. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rasha, and welcome everyone. I think some of you have read of the materials that we've talked about that have gotten us to this point in the past. I would briefly like to go over that before we get to a point where we're chatting with two of our guest speakers tonight. We have some really good things that have happened in Guelph, and I think we can't forget that the fact that we have two fairly good targets. However, there are some challenges about it, but the fact that we have targets at all, I think, is a really positive thing. And I want to be very clear about the difference between these two targets. The first one, the net zero carbon by 2050, that net zero carbon is for the community as a whole. That's the entire city, all the boundaries, all the businesses, all the residences, the institutions, places of worship, everyone within the community. The goal is to reach net zero carbon. The corporation of the city of Guelph, so that's that entity that operates the city of Guelph. So the corporation of the city of Guelph, the target there is 100% renewable energy, which is much more aggressive than just a net zero target. Another interesting interesting and a very positive thing is that City Council, the current City Council, has acknowledges that we are indeed in a climate emergency. Another motion that many of you were very much a part of making it happen was that the City Council passed a motion to ask the province to phase out fossil fuel burning for electricity generation. This one is key. Guelph was one of the first communities in Ontario to come out in favor of a coal phase out more than 20 years ago. It's about 22 or 23 years ago. And when the coal phase out actually completed in Ontario, I think we should be really proud of this. At the time, it was the single largest climate climate change initiative in all of North America. And I think it's something that we all need to be proud of. And the evidence on the health side of things has been profound insofar as reduction in respiratory diseases as a result of it. Another good thing is that in the 2020 city sustainability report, it showed approximately a 14% reduction in greenhouse gases in 2020 compared to 2019. We think it's a really great thing that we're seeing that kind of a reduction. However, we have a however that we'll look at later on in a couple of minutes on this one. So we've got those two targets: net zero carbon, remember, citywide, and 100% renewable, specifically for the corporation that is the city. So we have lots of good things happening. We've got lots of great people working on them, but there are challenges associated with it as well. The first thing is that the report that was issued is great. It's specifically looking at a whole series of sustainability indicators for this corporation of the City of Guelph. We don't have a similar report that's provided for citywide, for all of the energy that residences, institutions, and businesses are actually producing. So we don't have that kind of data that's as readily accessible and as and put together in a way that's very accessible for the broader public. The other thing, 14% is great, but we're really cautiously optimistic about that one, because remember that 2020 was our first COVID year. Hopefully our last, or hopefully this is our last COVID year. And I say that because what we've also noticed is that across the country, total amount of gasoline that was for transportation purposes dropped by 18% that year. I'd like to think that it's because everyone is driving less because they're doing it for environmental reasons, but we all know that the economy and businesses and individuals changed a lot of the ways that we function. And so all the groups are quite cautiously optimistic about that 14% and hope that we not only hold on to it, but we continue to move in the positive direction there. The other challenge that we see with the 2050 targets, specifically on the net zero carbon. So remember, this is the one that's citywide. The big challenge here is that the first interim target doesn't occur until 2030. And what that target says is that by 2030, we should be at 45% of net zero carbon by that point. There's nothing between now and then. On the 2050 target for 100% renewable energy, again, remember, it's the corporation of the City of Guelph. There are no interim targets. Let's dig a little deeper. That when it comes to the net zero plan, there's a review of the plan every 5 years with no accountability to targets until 2030. So essentially what that does is, with no interim targets to hold officials, and I have to say not only officials, but us. Remember that we're part and parcel of this. Is we can't just point fingers at officials, that we need to be part of the solution, and we need to be working together to get to this point. It doesn't hold officials or us accountable without having any targets until 2030. And if we want to put it in different terms, imagine seeing a child off in grade 1 today, dropping them off just a few short weeks ago in grade 1, all excited, and the teacher comes up to you and said, well, this is great. We're so happy to have little Johnny here today, but we want to let you know that he needs to remember everything. He needs to do a good job because he's not going to be tested until he reaches grade 9. That's essentially what we're saying with the target. Yes, will we be reporting and reviewing on a regular basis? Yes, but we don't have hard and fast targets. So what do we do next? We floated this idea by a number of organizations and groups, and ultimately the first one is the science is telling us that 2050 is too late. We need to do it faster. Is it 2040? Is it 2043? The consensus out there is that it has to be faster. We need to be doing it much faster than 2050. And as far as the interim targets are concerned, not only do we want interim targets that land every 4 years, a much more rigorous approach to things, but it would also, each one of those target years would fall within term of council. Council terms are 4 years, and our suggestion is that we make the targets land in the 3rd year of their tenure. The first 2 years, they're just getting their legs. By the time the third, and hopefully are helping to mold and actually reach those targets. By the 3rd year, the reporting on it gives them an opportunity to once again be responsible for it, and we as a community need to be responsible for it to understand how do we need to tweak that to move forward. It's clearly a better method to assess progress and makes officials accountable and us. And I'd also like to briefly mention that we wouldn't be the first community to do it. The City of Hamilton has already instigated 4-year interim targets. So quite frequently what we found is that some communities are reluctant to do something if they're the first one out of the gate. Hamilton's the only one in the immediate area that we know of, but we suspect that this type of approach will continue to broaden with other communities out there. Climate change needs to be in the official plan. This is boring planning stuff, but believe me, it is absolutely critical. The official plan is the document that the city refers to every time that a planning application goes before city council to build more houses, to build an industrial complex, to do whatever, change what's going on the landscape, regardless of what the landscape currently exists at. And we feel that all decisions must have a climate change lens front and center on every one of them, and include a question, a very aggressive question like, how will this decision help us reach our climate goals? It has to be very specific there, as opposed to, will this help us meet the goals? That could almost be a yes or no answer, and that could be on a very minimal level. But I think that we really need to put more onus on those that are developing our city to put more thought into the climate change piece on this. And we need to show by evidence how decisions are aligned specifically with the targets that we as a community would put together, those 4-year targets that would come forward. And here's the last one. This is about also empowering city staff to fight climate change every day. And when we think about it, there are over 2,000 people that work for the City of Guelph. And they're a cross section of the community, like a lot of you, like all of us that are on this call this evening. And when you think of it, a recent poll showed that more than 75% of the respondents felt that climate change was the most important issue in Guelph at the moment. So probably that's similar. 75% of city staff are also equally concerned about climate change and want to see action right away. So we think that there's a lot of appetite within the broader community, within the city hall itself. So we've got great city staff working for us. They also understand the challenges and opportunities available to fast-track solutions, regardless of where they work in the city. It doesn't need to be one tiny climate change office doing all the work. There are opportunities for everyone in their daily work to look at ways of fighting climate change. We can't leave it just to that very small group. So the next steps we see as being relatively simple. Do it faster. We need to see interim climate change targets within each term of city council. We need to entrench climate change action into the official plan. And finally, we need to empower all city staff, and frankly, all of us, to fight climate change every single day. Before we take questions, I'm going to keep moving on and introduce 2 of our speakers tonight. That we didn't announce this in advance, but we have 2 speakers tonight that I think most of you know. Councillor James Gordon from Ward 2 and Councillor Leanne Caron. And they've been also working behind the scenes and have also taken the material that we've put together as a coalition of groups and want to present some things that some materials that they've pulled together. And James, I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and then Leanne is going to continue after that. And then the three of us will come back and we'll start taking questions and get into a discussion period after that. So James, you can take the screen away from me anytime there.
All right. Thanks very much, Evan and Rasha. Great to see everybody here. And when I started to be first aware of this initiative that Evan and Emerge and Rasha have been bringing forward around the very simple statement, 2050 is too late, it kind of rang a bell for me with something else that both Leanne and myself are involved in. We're members of the National Climate Caucus and the provincial one of elected officials committed to climate change action. We meet every couple of weeks, and it's a very inspiring group, just as this is a very inspiring group. And they had been encouraging different municipalities to buy into what I see as a collaborative effort to show more strength in numbers with this city's Race to Zero initiative. And I was actually, it's interesting from a Guelph perspective, I was contacted both by former Toronto City Mayor David Miller and current Toronto City Councillor Mike Layton, who are leaders in this movement. And they both said, well, come on, Guelph, you guys are leaders already. You could do this. And they presented, collectively, we've been working on nudging this motion, which actually Leanne will speak about in a minute, which has an international component too. And it came from states and some parts of Canada. Cities are taking a bigger, more aggressive leadership approach to climate change than regional, provincial, or national governments. So if we can band together as different municipalities, we can demonstrate that strength. It looked like a good fit. And we're about to show you a motion that inspired by the great community buy-in. Neither Leanne or myself would ever consider bringing a motion forward that wasn't community driven, that didn't have community support. We think that this probably will, but we're looking for your input. So, and it also is a bit of closure for both Leanne and myself. We have a very short collective memory in this city, but we were the ones that brought forward a motion a couple of years ago to officially declare that we were in a state of emergency with climate. Believe it or not, times have changed so quickly, that motion failed. And it was decided by council that, well, that's a bit extreme. Let's just call it a climate crisis, and maybe it won't scare people that much. But as Greta Thunberg says, it's time to be scared. It's time to take action. So we think this is one way to do it. There are a lot of other tools at our disposal, and I'll let Leanne start with the beginnings of where this motion came.
Okay, thanks, James. I'm going to share my screen. So this motion is the collaboration of a number of different inputs that have happened. First and foremost, the Race to Zero campaign is a global campaign, and so we've used some of the wording from some of the other motions and whereas statements that have been rolling around other cities across the globe. But I know just from me personally, when the Race to Zero or the 2050 is too late tagline started to roll around the community, and Emerge started to take a role in bringing that imperative to public consciousness, I started doing a little bit of math in my own head, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be 86 years old in 2050. It is too late, because I want to see Guelph net zero before I leave this planet. And it isn't just about me. You know, my kids and grandkids, I feel I have a moral obligation for stewardship to them. And I'm not leaving this earth unless I know it's in good shape. So that personal moral imperative really started to rise in me just in the last couple of weeks when the whole 2050 too late tagline started to percolate. So how many out there, and I know you can't raise your hands unless you're on screen, but you know, how many of you in high school, university, or even in your work life, you leave things to the last minute? You know 3 months in advance, you've got a report due, or you've got an essay due, or you've got an assignment due. And a week before you think, gosh, I should get on that. And 3 days before you think, I better get to the library, get reading those resources and references. And then the night before you're pulling an all-nighter to get the damn thing done. I do that all the time. And that's what we're doing with climate change. That's what we're doing with this 2050 target, is we're putting it so far off into the future that it's not realistic. We're not going to see it. It's somebody else's problem. Well, somebody else's problem has been decades in the making. And as my father used to say, it's time to or get off the pot, and we have to make that move. And so, what this is designed to do, this motion that we're bringing forward, is not just James and I and our municipal colleagues across Canada upping that target to 2040, but also making this generation, this council, the next council, every council, and every provincial and federal government responsible and accountable as well. So I'm going to go through the backgrounder. James is going to touch on the draft motion, and this is draft. So please, I mean, part of this community event is that we would love your input on this. What are we missing? What do we need to be more emphatic on? And what is superfluous to this motion that doesn't need to be there? The first thing in the backgrounder is the why. And the why for me is the recent, well, for us is the recent IPCC report that global warming is happening actually at a faster rate than previously anticipated. And if that isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is. And that limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the goal set forth in the Paris Agreement, needs to be escalated. And those are science-based targets. And we need to not only achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but we need to halve the global emissions by 2030. So in this paragraph for me, the most important word is intergovernmental. We can't do this alone. All levels of government have to work in cooperation. All levels of government have to be accountable. But locally, all that James and I can do is try to inspire some local change. Guelph, and this is the imperative that we will bring to council, is facing financial losses in the millions, tens of millions of dollars due to increased intensity of storms, flooding, and drought linked to rising global temperatures. We're starting to see that already. Our budgets for stormwater and cleanup after storms has already changed in the last decade. And our goal of net zero emissions by 2050, while commendable, is based on an end goal too far into the future. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can insert measured increments by 2030 within a 10-year horizon, so we can demonstrate that we are heading in the right direction without a pandemic skewing the numbers. So a little bit of background. Race to Zero is a global campaign to rally leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, investors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that prevents future threats, creates jobs, and unlocks inclusive, sustainable growth ahead of the climate panel in 26 in November. Now, there's a lot more information about the background behind Race to Zero, where it started, who started it, who's involved, what cities, what businesses have already signed on. But the cities Race to Zero picked up where that left off, 4 cities by cities, and that is to actually get commitments and action. And tools and best practices and expertise, and to stay within that 1.5 degrees Celsius goal in the Paris Agreement. And the goal is to recruit 1,000 cities by 2026. So we will be one of 1,000 cities by then, I hope. So that's a bit of the backgrounder that will form part of this resolution. But what does that mean specifically to council's commitment? So I'm going to pass it over to James, who's going to go into some of the specific statements that we want to include in the motion that goes before council for ratification. Over to you, James. You're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. I'm just going to read the recommended motion. As Leanne said, we're open to input. This is mostly from that national and international initiative that they want us to bring similar motions right across the country. The city of Brampton just passed a very similar motion on September the 15th, just a couple of weeks ago. We're going to be in good company with this. It also is a motion that we acknowledge that staff, and I see we have Brian Hoyan with us today from our climate office at the city, doing excellent work, following council direction as to what we need for our targets. To reiterate what Leanne said, we've now recognized with this IPCC report that we need to speed the process up a little bit, continue the good work we're doing, make it more visible, and make it more of a team effort with different community groups too. So it is moved by Councillor Gordon, seconded by Councillor Karan, that the City of Guelph declares support for the city's Race to Zero as part of the United Nations Race to Zero campaign by joining hundreds of other cities in fighting climate change through the city's Race to Zero campaign. That's a lot of race to zeros in that sentence, I'm noticing. The City of Guelph pledges to the following commitments. We reaffirm our acknowledgement of the global climate crisis. We are committed to keeping global heating below the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement. We're committed to putting inclusive climate action at the center of all urban decision-making, including the City of Guelph official plan to create thriving and equitable communities for everyone. We invite our partners, political leaders, CEOs, trade unions, investors, and civil society to join us in recognizing the global climate crisis and help us deliver on science-based action to overcome it. The City of Guelph pledged to take action to reach net zero carbon community-wide and 100% renewable energy for the corporation of the City of Guelph in the 2040s or sooner is our pledge, which is in line with global efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The City of Guelph we pledge the City of Guelph will create 4-year interim climate change targets that fall within the City Council's term of office, with the first set of interim targets by Q2 2022. The City of Guelph modify our 2030 target in order to achieve 50% of our net zero carbon and renewable energy targets to reflect our fair share of the global reduction in CO2 identified in the IPCC special report on global warming. The City of Guelph, item 6, the City of Guelph proceed to planning at least one inclusive and equitable climate action as listed on the city's Race to Zero website that will help to place our city on a resilient pathway consistent with the 1.5 degrees Celsius objective of the Paris Agreement and begin implementation no later than 2022. City of Guelph report progress annually for the entire City of Guelph and continuing reporting on the corporation beginning no later than 2022. And finally, that the City of Guelph empower all city staff, which we know have great ideas and visions, to bring their ideas forward to fight climate change, engaging and training staff on how to help reach our goals. And as you can see, Leanne's actually editing as we're going here. This thing is only about a half an hour old in the form that you're looking at now. It's a work in progress, and we're hoping to get your ideas, starting with, does this actually do the job for what we're trying to attain here? I'm excited about it because I think, as someone who's often trying to move things forward at council, it really helps a lot to know that we're not alone in this, that other communities are buying in. We can do it too. and also that we have the community engagement, the city staff input, everything's in place to make this happen. We just need to speed it up, make it a little bit more robust, and I think we can show some difference with it. So that's me.
That's fantastic, James. I've been watching this as it's been maturing, and it's been great to see. And I'm hoping that a lot of the folks that are here tonight are as excited as we are about it. I'll be attempting to moderate the questions that are coming in, and we'll try to keep track of them. I must admit that sometimes they come in really fast succession. But before we get to the questions, Leanne, is there anything more you want to add before we get into the questions and then into discussion?
No, I think I go straight into discussion. I mean, I see some of the participants in the panel, and I'd like to
Sure.
hear their input, because I know that some of them are coming to the table with very with science backgrounds or community organization backgrounds. And you know, one of the things we talk about is reduction, 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 reduction. We don't talk about offsets. And so a good example is I see Nora Chalner on the participant list, and she's with Urban Forest Friends. And, you know, we may be able to add a clause, not just about reducing, but also offsetting carbon sinking through a more robust urban forestry plan. That could be one of the could be one of the actions that we do under number 6. So I see a lot of expertise in our participant list tonight. So I'd like to open it up and hear what we're missing and what we should focus on.
Why don't I start with trying to bring some of these questions front and center. There's a technical question here for motion. It is mentioned that Guelph is facing intensities of storms. Would you please provide data references that shows the intensity increasing? I don't know that either of you have the reference in your back pocket, but I suspect motion will make an attempt to find that, and in the materials that we send out, we'll attempt to get that. Unless James or Leanne, does that are you able to respond to that question?
I don't really have that reference handy. I left it in my other pants. But I think
we'll make a point of it.
Yeah, it comes up quite often at council about the increased stress on our infrastructure, which we are way behind at anyway. I don't know if Leanne, you can point to more details, but it's a very good point raised in the question that should be very transparent and right up front as to, it's not okay just to say we're struggling with these storms. It would be great to add something in. I don't know if that would be part of the motion wording or part of the preface to it to explain why we need to do this.
And a couple of people have mentioned that they're a little disappointed with the language around acknowledgement of a climate crisis. And many of the people on this call were there that night, and I know that both you, Leanne, and James were disappointed with it. But from our perspective as an environmental organization, we looked at that and thought, do we make a point of building a whole campaign around changing that one word? Or more importantly, that specific language is really important to all of us, but the general public doesn't understand the difference between acknowledging and declaring a climate emergency. And we gave a critical eye on that and said, where is our time better spent? You know, if we want to go down that path, we can, but needless to say, what we're discussing tonight has much broader impact than whether it's a declaration or an acknowledgement. However, I'd encourage those that are interested in going down that path to do so. You know, we'd support you in doing it. It wouldn't be first on our list on where to go. James and Leanne, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, well, I think the most important part of that evening was the discussion, and those who changed the wording to crisis and acknowledge, and those who argued against our role in declaring an emergency, also articulated over and over and over again during the debate that action was more important than words. Action's more important than words. And so that discussion has meant we can hold that that idea accountable. We can use that argument back to our colleagues and say, you talked about action and here's your opportunity for action. So let's act. So the discussion was more important than the outcome.
James?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if I differ slightly, the language that we use is really important in who we are able to engage from our community. So if the language itself is clear and points directly towards that action that Leanne is describing, then it is useful to play with the words a little bit.
Got it. And on the note about words, there is a mention here that it would be great to see an acknowledgement of the importance of engaging with our Indigenous partners in the process. Point well taken. I see lots of heads nodding there. And another one here, I think the language used saying 2040 or sooner, pick a target that is earlier than 2050 and stick to it. Leanne and James, jump in as I move down this. What will the city do to support residential energy reduction and renewables?
Well, that's a good one that James and I we've been tag teaming every single development application. Every single development application that comes before council, we ask the proponent, what are you doing to help us meet our climate goals? And frankly, it's getting almost humorous, James? Because I would say 90% of them say, well, we're going to put in Energy Star appliances. And sorry, but that's an industry standard now. That I don't think you can buy a stove or a fridge that isn't Energy Star. So that's not going to cut it anymore. We need to do two things. Number one, embed our climate goals into the official plan so that we can hold developers to those goals. Number two, actually there's three things. Number three is incentivize a development that helps us meet our climate goals. So projects where installation of geothermal and solar and other forms of net zero energy, district energy, give those priority in the way we unroll development and provide infrastructure to development. And then the third thing is we need the province and the feds. And one of the things the province needs to do is modify the building code. Because it is not in the building code that builders have to do this. So until we have some more teeth at the provincial level, we are going to continue to spin our wheels, and we're going to put in Energy Star appliances and pat ourselves on the back as if that's going to have any impact whatsoever.
I think it's also important to mention, as part of the answer to this question, that I'm kind of excited to see next month we get a report on council from our Energy Guelph, which is dealing with on a household level with retrofits and energy efficiency. And they've got a good plan that, again, is a model that has been adopted by lots of other communities too. So I think you're going to see rolled out pretty soon an aspect of our whole climate picture that will be covered there, and it's something that we can all embrace and move forward with.
And if I could
add one more thing, I think there's a fourth thing that we can do as a city added to my list, and that is we can role model. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper and more economical to install renewables for new facilities, and so we need to keep on doing. And we've made great progress installing on our rooftops. We're going to be building a new South End Rec Center, new parks, any new Guelph building should be carbon neutral, and so we can role model and walk the talk. And we are.
And James and Leanne, on this note, there's the carrot and the stick approach when it comes to dealing with developers on this. And I know that the City of Toronto, when it comes to multi-residential buildings, I don't think they've done it on single family dwelling or new single family dwellings. But what they have is they have a stepped approach that every year, if a developer starts to improve above building code by X percent, I can't remember what it is, but there are 2 or 3 year increments that lead up until 2030 when the building code for multi-residential will be compared to what's called passive house standard or net zero energy. And what that amounts to is a 70% reduction in the amount of energy that's used in the home, making it really viable, that much more viable for solar. But what the developer gets in exchange, so they're not mandated to do it, but if they do it, and I don't know the details on it, it'd be worth to do some more digging on it, is that they go to the front of the pile from a development, from a planning perspective. So their approvals are faster. I don't know all the intricacies of this, but that's worth a lot of money to developers to be able to move things along quickly. And I've had some discussions with people that were involved with a new 1,800 student residents. Leanne, this would be of interest to you, at the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto that's going exactly down this path. So there are other methods besides monetary methods that the city can use to help lever that up. There's another technical question about temperature increase. And yes, more than one person has asked if they could get a link. Thank you, Mandy, for the reminder to the document that we're opening tonight. So within the next few days, we'll be sending out an email with a video of this event with all the slides and the draft document that James and Leanne are working on, or at least the current draft of it. And I suspect James and Leanne will go through other things as well. Let me just see. There's a mention here that not so very long ago, the great political hay was made of the mysterious Guelph factor, which was premised on the idea that developers and investors were reluctant to come here. If this city decides to commit to address the targets and reducing emissions, could we foresee a reluctance of people moving here? And James and Leanne, before you get into it, Duncan, we have 8 builders in the city of Guelph that are building or have built to net zero and passive house standards of new construction. One of them is building 250 units in the south of Guelph that literally uses 70% less energy. So it's already happening. The builders are ahead of the curve on this. Part of the problem here appears to be on the demand side of it. And people are buying these places, and they're paying slightly more money as a result of it. I just wanted to preface that before James and Leanne, where do you want to go with that one?
Well, I could just support that statement you made. It's very important when we hear things like the Guelph factor and do we want to scare developers away? That's pretty old school, and things are changing pretty quickly. As you pointed out, despite the fact that Leanne in particular almost gets laughed at by developers when she says, when is your development going to be net zero? Those who have stepped up to be good corporate citizens find that you can make money on this too. It's an economic driver. People are willing to pay a little more for the knowing that they're contributing to the next generation's well-being by embracing this. And Guelph in particular is really good at that. We have a long-term vision for that kind of thing that developers could buy into, not just so that they can pat themselves on the back, but because it's profitable now too.
Yeah. So the only thing that I would add to that is that we have a severe shortage of affordable housing in this community. And we have a very narrow definition of affordability, because we talk about affordability as in the cost of rent or the cost of purchase. And affordability is also the cost of operating. So if your monthly utility bills are part of your affordability challenge, we need to talk about getting utility bills down. And the only way to do that is to have renewable energy, have a consistent and stable supply of energy, and to make sure that any affordable housing project, any social housing project, any city or county project involving residential development or any form of development does a full life cycle assessment of what affordability really means.
Just to answer a really quick question here, does the motion include incorporation of climate crisis lens into the OP? Absolutely. Leanne and James have definitely built it into it. On another question about the building code, and just not to get too down in the weeds on that piece of it, the building code had some really progressive things that were going to slowly come into effect up until 2030, and When a new government came into effect in 2018, a new provincial government, all that got thrown out the window. That's not to say that that there couldn't be changes, and we need to see a movement to move forward on it. The building code today is much better from an energy perspective than it was 20 years ago, but it's not quite where we need to be. Just racing through these. So question, once the race to zero commitment is passed, could we adopt a homeowner organization, business, etc., levels of sign-on commitments achievement like the poverty task force, living wage partnerships, loudly celebrating those that achieve or surpass these levels? Also the point, Leanne, about Energy Star, each level will have strategies to achieving impossible states.
Well, I could just say that part of what that question asks is already built into the process that we are witnessing this evening. It's very inspiring to me to see those, is it 14 organizations that you've already got that have pledged to support what's going on? When Rasha was reading out the names of those sponsors, some of you might have found the same interest that I have, that there's a lot of intersecting groups, advocacy groups in this city. This is one of the first times I've seen them all joining together, and we want to work in a common front. We don't want to be duplicating energies. I use the word energy non-ironically, and I think it's already there. This gives Leanne and myself the ability to go to council and say, this isn't just us. Look at who's already demanding this. Look who is willing to bring the support of their members and their community to it. So it's that strength in numbers and also the diversity of people that are buying into this as well, that I hope will get the job done for us. And I'll probably mention this 4 or 5 more times, but when this does come to council, all of those 14 groups, I want to see them as delegates at that meeting. I want to see all of you as delegates. I want to see letters to the councillors. Councillors are moving into an election year next year, and they love to be loved. So if you say, your support for this motion gives me the confidence as a citizen to give you support as a councillor, I think we can go a long way, because the councillors will recognize the value in the support they will get if they support the motion.
Mm-hmm. James, you're absolutely right. And I think what we often get bogged down in our political role is short-term thinking, not just on climate change, but on financial budgeting and what's the tax increase this year. And it's all about that 1-year tax increase. And we don't talk about, we talk about tax increases and we don't talk about investments. And we need to, in my mind, make sure that our investments, our resources are going to the right things that have a return. And the ROI and climate change and renewables is all there. All of that evidence is there. So yeah, maybe we need to put a few more $1 million in the budget to escalate our climate change goals at the city. But the payoff in 10 years means that we're going to have a more stable economy. We're going to have impact on climate change. We're going to have a city with a robust transit system and grow transit. There's just so many factors that are layered and layered and layered. We keep talking about climate change, and I'm worried that, I mean, that's what it's about. Absolutely. That is the bottom line. That is the end goal. But the layers are a robust, functioning, frequent, well-used, efficient transit system, a green canopy and a system of parklands and natural spaces, and greening Guelph. It's also about food security, preserving Class A farmland in our rural area for food security and community gardens, and also within the city. Like it's not just about climate change, but all those things, social justice, dealing with poverty, dealing with transit, they all help us achieve our climate change goals. And we need to have advocates in each of those areas, and all of the organizations. Some of them specialize in food security. Some of them are homelessness and poverty. Some of the organizations are Transit Alliance group, but they're all working towards the same goal.
There's a quick technical question here. The example of developers who are seeing climate change is profitable. This is just off the top of my head. I know that there are at least 8, but here are ones that come to mind. Shed Designs, Evolve Builders, Timber Works, Reed's Heritage Homes, and TerraView Homes is probably the largest builder of them all. They're building 250 units in the South End. However, all of them will tell you that it's still a hard sell with customers. A few years ago, the premium cost of going to net zero on a new build was somewhere around 15%. I understand it's down about 11%. It could be significantly lower now with higher real estate costs, but there still is a bit of a price difference there. And your question was those companies that are profiting from it. A lot of them are having a hard time profiting from it because the concept isn't one that you can see. In a lot of cases, they argue that people want marble floors, or they want I don't know, they want a jacuzzi or something else. That concept of seeing value in something that's invisible in a well-insulated, well-built home is a difficult one for people to understand, to pay additional costs on it. Just comments from the two of you. I'm going to try to get down these.
From builders is that just the cost of materials, that the embodied energy in building a house by bringing in offshore materials, offshore lumber, offshore finishes, offshore flooring, offshore. There's so much that goes into building a house that isn't even produced locally, and so builders go for what's cheaper, and so the real cost needs to be factored into those climate calculations, because the embodied energy in building with non-local materials has a climate cost as well.
Yeah, and I would add that it's easy for developers, and I understand why, and at the city level for some of our colleagues to say, well, here's the action you're suggesting. We can't actually afford that right now because these are tough times. And yet things have changed so quickly that it will be very soon, very obvious that we cannot afford not to do that kind of action now. It'll be more expensive in the long run. There's a very good economic model that involves, and when you referenced, okay, there's the extra construction costs now, that's going back to what Leanne said about making an investment for your future. And it's very exciting to watch the kind of investments that are possible now that show a really great financial and social return.
Yeah. So we need more champions. Jeff made a comment about a community award that gives a developer public recognition. Great idea. We also need champions who live in net zero homes, or who've built or bought net zero homes, or who've modified their homes to net zero, and they're seeing those cost savings and they're seeing those energy efficiencies. And we need those champions to, if only they could drive around, like, you know, the greatest advertisement for an electric car is an electric car on the road. You know, people see it and they're curious about it, and they want to be part of that. But we need more champions talking about how great it is that their entire building envelope energy bill for that month was $24.
I'm going to put to that note, I'm going to put in the chat a link to our resources page where we have a list of about 6 different homes that completely different types of homes, retrofits and brand new builds that meet or exceed that net zero standard. I love Jeff's idea about recognizing those builders. But Jeff, what if instead City Hall provided some type of an incentive to encourage them to go down that path? if you're the developer, like moving you to the front of the line if you were going to build net zero homes or something like that. Maybe they'd be more willing to do it if they could get the houses up and running.
Yeah, and I think we need to really quantify what the cost difference is. I mean, developers are saying, oh, it costs so much more, and we can't get people to buy these premium houses. Well, I've got Rob at the side has just chatted with me and saying the passive house net zero premium is less than 5%, and that math is lost in the noise. It's actually not that big a difference, and it's going down. It's getting better and better every year. The cost of building net zero should not be an impediment.
Taking a look at the time, quickly going through some more questions. And Rob states again that construction industry needs to be radically changed, not just incentives. We need to mechanize and automate. Where's the Ford Model T when it comes down to house? And folks, this Rob is one of those great experts that we've got on the call tonight. Rob is an engineer, specifically engineering and working with low energy buildings, both on an individual basis, but also multi-residential. Works with a number of contractors and also architects. It's a great resource for us to have in this city. And I have posted the energy efficient homes. You'll see a list of them there. You might even recognize some of the people there. James, and well, let me ask both James and Leanne a question. And what do you see as the stumbling blocks to making this happen?
Our generation?
Yeah.
My generation? I don't know about you, James, but I live in a single detached house. I feel the contradiction. I have kids who have said to me, I will never, I don't own a car. I'll never own a car. I don't want to own a car. I'm fine living in a dense downtown environment. They have no desire to own a house. And I think it's, I mean, I hate to say, I don't want to push it onto our youth because that's not fair. We have an obligation. Changing a culture in one generation or two generations is difficult, but not impossible. I mean, look what's happened with COVID. We've made significant social changes due to COVID. Our previous generations lived through the Depression and a radical economy change, the world wars. We went from a wood burning society to a coal burning society to an oil burning society to a natural gas society. We can make this change. So I think our biggest barrier, Evan, is ourselves.
Yeah, I actually quite like your COVID comparison. I'm noticing a lot of similarities where we've already learned that with our COVID crisis or emergency, we won't get to net zero with with the pandemic unless everyone buys into it, which we're seeing there's about between 15 and 20% of folks that are not buying into it. So that's what's holding the process up. With climate change, it doesn't matter if we've got a large movement together to address this with the actions that we take as homeowners, as renters, as politicians, if the next town down the road is still spewing out what they used to. So it needs to, and that means federal and provincial pressures need to be put on. That's one of the ideas behind this. When Leanne bravely asks at a council meeting, Mr. Developer, is your development going to be net zero? She shouldn't have to ask that question anymore. It should be a matter of saying, Mr. Developer, do you want a building permit? If you do, make this net zero. And that can't quite happen now because of the provincial building code and the provincial, to say it bluntly, it's the provincial attitude around that. So I'm hoping that when we're putting pressure on ourselves and we're looking for initiatives in the city, we're also looking for the buying power we can do in pressuring the provincial, especially government around.
I could scratch a little deeper on the question I had there, and Mandy has rephrased it that I thought, thanks for that, Mandy. And she says, which parts of this motion do you think will get the most pushback, and what kind of support would be the most useful from the community in order to get it passed?
That is a really good question. I think that probably where the pushback will be is the 2040 number. I think council seemed comfortable that we could meet a 2050 target. And we'll probably ask our staff, you know, can we meet 2040 target? Can we meet the 2040 target? So what we need is to empower our staff to say and be honest with us. Like, don't think about the politics. If it's going to take $17 million over 10 years, and we could meet a 2040 target, then let's talk about the resources we need. So I think the biggest pushback is, how much is it going to cost? To which James and I will have the answer. How much is it going to cost to not do it?
James, yeah.
I would say the pushback to me is probably going to come from a feeling, having done quite a bit of work, we are doing well with our initiatives in the city, but there tends to be a complacency that goes with it that says, hey, we got this. Why are you stirring up the pot here? Because we have targets. We're going to make it. So our point in bringing this forward, one of the main points, is that yes, we do have those in place. We've learned that they're not enough, and we have to be faster, more efficient with it all. And the pushback will be those who feel sensitive to the fact that are we criticizing them for what the policies already are, when we need to put that behind us and say, okay, we've come this far, what can we do together to get even farther?
I think we have a good argument though, James, for the 4-year increment on reporting, to set targets and report on those targets once per term of council, because which one of our colleagues is not going to want to be accountable? And we can use that language as, do you not feel that you need to be accountable at one point during the term of office? And if you don't feel that you're accountable for those targets, then you shouldn't be in office. So I think we've got some pretty good arguments for some of those sensitive points. But one of the other questions I see, Evan, is that what messaging do we need from the public? Well, I think we need 3 different types of messaging. The first type is the crisis, the emergency, the IPCC report, the fact that the world is moving faster towards that 1.5 than expected, and just that immediacy message. That's number 1, the immediacy message. Number 2 is we have a role, cities have a role, cities have a responsibility. We can't leave this to other levels of government. This isn't just about the province or the feds. We need the city to take leadership, and we are part of a group of other cities doing this. We're not alone. Because we do have a faction within within council, and I'm not going to name names, who say it's not stay in our lane. By talking about this big picture global stuff, we're out of our lane. And I think the message needs to be, we're absolutely in our lane. And then the third message, I think, is the financial one, that you want your tax dollars to go to this kind of initiative. You want your investments in the city to go to mitigating climate change. I think those are the 3 messages I think would help at council. James, you might have a few other more social justice kind of angles that could work.
Well, a political angle I see is the advantage to those one, reporting on our targets every 4 years during each term of council means that it will not be politically expedient anymore to try to kick the football into the next council. And you've seen this more than I have, Leanne, but we'll see it this December. We'll see it this November at budget time. Since we're moving into an election year, it'll be great pressure on candidates, incumbents, to say, well, we want to vote for me, I'm going to keep your taxes as low as humanly possible. And that's very compelling to voters. But if they have to be accountable for what those targets are, and we acknowledge that there's community buy-in to those targets, then I think that that aspect might be removed, which has been a real impediment to moving forward a lot of times.
I noticed another question that came up again. Thanks, Indigo, for bringing that up. We did mention it earlier, but the question was, when do you think this is going to council? And I think, Leanne, you said that you wanted it had to go to council at some point in November at the earliest.
Yeah, I think procedurally, November is probably the earliest. After this meeting, we weren't going to take it to our committee chairs until after this meeting, till we kind of got some, grounding on the motion. And the earliest it would be was committee of the whole in November.
Mm-hmm. And I can turn the question back to you, wonderful participants here this evening. If it's coming at the early in November, we also want to make sure that is enough time for all the groups mentioned, all the individuals that want to participate, whether they can activate, motivate their membership and really get a community uprising together so that it seems like a no-brainer by the time it comes to council. I think that is enough time. And also, as has already been mentioned, if we delay it any further, we're going to be running into budget and the end of the year, and it might get lost in the shuffle. So that's kind of an ideal time for me too. I wish our system, some of you might not be aware, we couldn't just go, there's a council meeting coming up on Monday. We couldn't just present it on Monday. There's quite a protocol to go through and vetting that needs to be done, placing on agendas, and it can be a slower process than I want.
So James and Leanne, I mean, what we'll do is that if you feel that there's going to be any more edits based on what you're hearing tonight, but if you can get us a copy by end of day tomorrow, and we'll be sending out the link to to all the materials associated with this event tonight, and be sure that there's a link to a version of that so that people can be up to speed on it as much as possible. And then we'll ensure that we're keeping people up to date on the process. And when we expect to go first, as you say, committee. So if I understand it, it has to first go to the committee of the whole. And then is it about a month after that it goes to the council meeting? Is that correct? Leanne, you're on mute there. Sorry.
Yeah, committee of the whole is always the first Monday in a month, and then it goes, anything ratified at committee of the whole then goes to the fourth Monday of the month for a full council meeting. When does our Energy Guelph come to council? That's a good question.
James, I think you said you're expecting next month. Was that right?
Yeah.
That's my understanding. It has been delayed a couple of times, but I think that's the latest that I've heard.
Gotcha. Okay.
I wanted to, I'm not, are there any other questions that need to be addressed, Evan? Because the one thing I did want to add is, and I don't know if it belongs in the motion, but we are so fortunate that we're in a university town where climate change, environmental science, food and ag, and there's a real awareness in our community, and I think we have a lot of energy that a lot of cities don't have. So I'm feeling like if the city of Guelph can't pass this motion, well, let me put it another way. If the city of Hamilton can pass this motion, and the city of Guelph sure as hell can.
This is the timing of all of this is all coming together so well. I have to admit I'm a little giddy about it all. I mean, we originally started floating this idea the 2050 is too late, probably back in January, and it's been slowly building. And kind of glad that it got stalled back in May at one point, but it gave us all a chance to sort of recoup and look at things. And frankly, the timing of it lining up with this race to zero amongst multiple cities all over the place, I think it just helps to put an even stronger lens on it all, and I think can add value to it. And I can't wait for us to go to the committee of the whole and then to council. I think it could be a lot of fun. And frankly, regardless of political stripes, the previous federal election to this one, it was the then conservative leader at the time said that would be the last election that climate change would be a divisive issue. And regardless of what you might think of some of the parties' plans this time around, they were all trying to outdo each other, and some better than others. But I'm kind of excited about that. And frankly, I think that the political climate, if that's what's happening on a broad scale across the country, I think it can only be easier in Guelph. I find it hard to believe that it would be any harder.
Evan, can I ask you a question? It is exciting to see everything coming together here with the partnerships that you've helped to create moving forward, and all these different organizations, individuals buying into it. What are your aspirations for moving things forward outside of the context of this motion?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll continue to network with that group to ensure that they're communicating with their constituencies, because we're speaking to different people and have different approaches on things, but we all want to see, we all want to see this significant action in climate action, needless to say. So the other piece I think that's important from a communication standpoint, and we'd be more than willing to jointly put out a press release with you and Leanne. I'm speaking on everyone else's behalf, but I'm sure these other organizations would be supportive of a joint press release going out to introduce this to the broader public, because I think that needs to gurgle out there, and the quicker we get it in the media, even if it's before you've submitted it. I mean, it's public now, right? I mean, you've shared it this evening. So I think the quicker we can get it into the public realm and let that discussion continue out there, I think it can only help.
Great. Yeah, my only suggestion around that, I don't know if you agree, Leanne. Yeah, it's public as of now. However, a press release and growing public awareness would be more effective if we could say, here's what's coming November the 4th. Like once we had that date set.
Okay, got it. No, right. So that we're not, we don't have to sort of double step it and say, oh yeah. Now wait a second, we need more information. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay. I think we've sort of dealt with a lot of these questions in different ways, but there's a continuing question around green bonds. Is the city considering going down the path of green bonds? This is getting into a very specific issue, but your thoughts on that?
Personally, I love the idea. I don't have an answer, and I'm not sure that the city has talked about it. So I'm going to ask the question of our chief financial officer and see whether that's something that we can explore a little further.
Great. Okay. Well, on that note, I'm gonna hand the floor over to my colleague Rasha for just the next few minutes here, and I'm gonna mute myself. Here we go. Go ahead, Rasha.
Thanks, Evan. So with this, we reached to the end of our event. Thank you all to our attendees for making it till the end. And I hope that you find tonight's presentations very insightful and instrumental. And great thank you to our city councilors, James Gordon and Leanne Carroll, for their outstanding support and insightfulness. And finally, once again, thanks to all of our co-sponsors. Good night, everyone, and see you in our upcoming event. Thank you. Good night. Okay, thanks. Goodbye.